Hey guys, it's Eyes, and welcome to Outroads. This is the first and foundational episode of the podcast, and today I'm talking to Jason Pear. He's a good friend, a highly accomplished mountaineer, chairman of the Angeles chapter of the Sierra Club. He's president of some very prestigious orthodontic society whose name escapes me. Just an exciting guy to be around. We talk climbing, mishaps in the wild, we ruminate on risk and death, and our profound inability to sit still and watch Netflix. It's good stuff. Let's get into it. All right, so this is the first episode.
All right.
This is the maiden voyage of this slowly sinking ship right out the port. Yeah. I'm glad you're here for it.
Hey, the question is, will we make it out of port?
Yeah, that is the question. I felt like it was important to have you as the first guest on the podcast, or to do this with me, because the whole thing was kind of inspired by this latest wave of total insanity that I blame you single-handedly for.
And I like
yeah, you were the drug pusher in this situation.
Yeah, no kidding. I was the pusher man, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So just to explain, while I hope the show is about all sorts of unconventional life choices and obsession in all its colors, we now share a specific flavor, which is kind of what's now called peak-bagging. But in short, it's mountaineering, mostly non-technical, although sometimes technical, involved with backpacking and like through hiking. But it's all about specifically reaching these summits,
right?
Come hell or high water,
no matter what the conditions,
and returning home to talk about it. Yeah. So when I first met you, I'd been very interested in it. I'd been hiking a lot, backpacking a lot, and looking at them from afar. Yeah. With kind of like this sense of trepidation and fatalistic wonder. Right. Like at some point I might need to do this. Right. But the interesting thing is that until you have someone to show you how, there's no set. It's not like climbing. Now, if someone wants to learn climbing, they go to a climbing gym, right?
Absolutely.
In terms of mountaineering, peak-bagging, or any of the kind of hardcore technical scrambly stuff, you need someone to offer you entree. You need someone to open the door for you, right? And you were that guy for me.
There's a few avenues out there, but otherwise you kind of have to get out there and hopefully meet people that are doing it similar, and you fall into place with them and you follow them and have them lead you, and there you go. All it takes is a few times to get that confidence built up that you can do it yourself. But to tell you actually...
Ooh, really? You think so? I
think so. I mean, well, on certain levels. I mean, like there's so many levels of climbing, starting from class 1 up. And once you've done a few, I think then you start looking at, okay, what's class 1? What's something I can do without damaging myself, long term. And you start saying, I'll pick off a few of those, and your confidence level builds from there. But absolutely, initially, it's just, if you've never done it before, it's so nice to have a mentor of some kind, not truly a mentor, but just somebody you can do it with and feel confident.
No, I'd use the word mentor. I think it's true. Okay. Because, do you think there's any other way? Did you start on your own, or did you have someone open the door for you?
No, I started on my own. I started on my own because there was no climbing gyms or anything like that when I started to even do any sort of climbing. And so what I started learning was, my journey to start doing peak-bagging, similar to yours, looking up in the mountains, and with awe and wonder, and thinking I really want to be up there. It didn't start for me backpacking. It started for me fishing with my dad in the Sierras. And I'm eternally grateful for my parents for taking me up to the mountains so often, and whether it would be skiing or fishing, and those are pretty much the two pastimes we went and did. When we were fishing, we'd rent the boat, get all the worms, get all the gear. My dad loved all the gear, and we'd go sit in the boat with, a couple 1-pound bags of M&Ms, just, fishing off the side of the boat, catching fish. And it was exciting at times, very little times. And sitting in the boat, though, I was just looking up at the mountains going, I really need to be up there. I don't need to be sitting on this lake chewing on M&Ms, waiting for the fish to bite my line.
Very different rhythms, fishing
very different. And I really needed to be up there. And I was just immersing myself in just everything in National Geographic that would come my way about climbing, or, watching movies, whether Hollywood movies or just documentaries that I'd find. I'd love to say I found them online, but no, it's just, I guess, coming across them randomly back in the day and on TV. And so I knew I really wanted to be up there. So I would just make forays. I started doing some backpacking myself. Had no mentors for backpacking. In fact, the first time I went backpacking, I had a large school backpack with my sleeping bag tied to the outside. It was just a standard sleeping bag. And I actually brought Jiffy Pop and a glass bottle of apple juice.
How much did it weigh?
I don't even know how much it weighed, but it was a lot. I took 2 girls that I was going to college with who'd never been camping at all. We went to the top of Yosemite Falls and backpacked up there and slept outside, no tent or anything. It was fantastic. You know, I was hooked. I don't think they've ever been backpacking again, but that was the start of my journey. And at that point, I knew that's what I needed to do. And then I was like, okay, I'll go to the top of, Half Dome. That seems like a natural place to go. I'll go to the top of, North Dome. They started like getting the tops of these little peaks. And then at some point I said, I need to start pushing that a little bit, did Mount Whitney and these other class 1 peaks. And then doing enough class 1 peaks, I realized I got the book, RJ Secor's High Peaks Past, the High Sierra. Yeah. And once I started reading that, I was reading the different passes, reading the different trails, reading the different summits, and I would always focus on what's class 1, what can I do, and then when you start doing class 1, you start getting bored of the trails, and you start saying, well, gosh, it'd be nice to do this alternative little route up here. That looks fun to climb, and you start pushing yourself, and then when you start pushing yourself, all of a sudden you get more comfortable in class 2, then class 3. And I didn't really have anybody I was doing that with. I did a lot of solo stuff initially.
You were?
Yeah. And just because that was. It's not like I had anybody I could call up and say, hey, I want to go climb this mountain. And so that's how that all started for me, And then I started doing some mountaineering too. I had aspirations.
Yeah. But that's one of the interesting things about this kind of peak bagging and mountaineering is that on one hand, it's extremely personal, right? Oh, yeah. That a lot of it you do alone by nature. It's not a team sport by any method. And unlike climbing, you don't need anyone. No. To belay you. You don't need a team. But on the other hand, in terms of comfort level and risk assessment, there's a huge benefit to having a group or at least a partner. Yeah. Especially I found, clearly we had different paths, but when learning, I felt like the risk of the unknown was too high to just go out there on my own and see what happened. Sure. I needed someone to kind of say, here's how it's done. Right. If things go wrong, someone else is here with you. Right. You're not going to pay for your inexperience too intensely. Right. And that was something that concerned me. But then the more I do it, the more I realize that it's a very kind of personal, spiritual pursuit that in the end, and this is an interesting question also. We have these lists. And let me just describe them in case anyone listening doesn't know about them. Yeah, so
obsessive. The obsessive-minded.
Yeah, and I'm curious how you view this. So we are approaching most of our peak bagging off lists that we've gone very deep with. And the idea is that we have this kind of accomplishment mindset. Ideally, you want to tick through the whole list. We've got maps here with pins in them. I have more at home. You've got the same at your place as well as an online database. And we're slowly trying to work our way through these very prestigious and difficult lists. And that gives it more of a sense of sport and organization. But do you think that some of that is entirely fabricated? Like in the end, the reason we're out there, right. is to not just test ourselves, but to kind of explore the unknown, both the unknown world around us and the world outside the safety net of society, but also the unknown internally. Like, how do I handle fear? How do I handle risk of injury or death? So we have these two sides. One is really amorphous with no structure. And then on top of it, we've overlaid this very definitive sport-like structure of lists. Right. Yeah. How do you relate to that? And do you think one is false and one is true? Do you think they work against each other or with each other? How is it for you?
For me, it's worked with each other because I've viewed those lists as a guide to places outside my comfort zone as far as traveling to. Like for instance, let's take the Sierra list, which we've been working through recently.
That's the SPS Sierra Peaks section.
And the Sierra Nevada is a daunting, amount of a mountain. It's a daunting mountain range, north to south, east to west. And to try to wrap your head around the whole thing is really difficult to do. There's so many nooks and crannies. It's like looking at an English muffin, and it's just and what's around this corner, what's deep in that pocket. And the reality is, when I started backpacking, I would backpack out of essentially 2 trailheads because I was comfortable there. And I did multiple trips out of those couple trailheads. And I think even Kim Stanley Robinson, his book, The High Sierra, he even says, for 20 years, he just went to the same spot because that was his comfort zone. And
Sure.
it took a while for him to actually get out of his comfort zone and start exploring the whole Sierra. For me, when I see these lists, what it does is it draws me to these new areas that I've never been before, that I probably would have never been bold enough to try, or, and so despite the fact that, yes, it is sport to tick through these lists, for me, it's also taking me out. Each time I do it, I'm like, okay, I'm getting outside my comfort zone. I'm going to a new spot and I'm going to explore new areas. And when I do, there's something that very spiritual about that, when you're discovering new areas, and like seeing what's around the next corner, and working hard to get around that next corner, not just peeking, but actually really having to get there and actually put your feet in it and smell the air there. Right. Something very spiritual about that. And I'm so grateful for lists in that respect, because I think they have, they've grounded me in a different way than a sport way. That said, I love putting the pins in the maps.
Right.
I mean, I love it so much.
There's still this base animal pleasure and just, I did it and now I've done this many.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. There's something special
but
about that. But
the only danger is that if it gets too reified or too organized or too predictable, you lose the sense of the unknown.
Right.
And at that point, you've lost the plot entirely, because the whole point of this pursuit, I think, is to continually put yourself in a new position.
Oh, yeah.
Right. In a new place.
Yeah.
Which actually brings me to another question that I'm curious about. I think inseparable from this is risk. Because when we talk about putting yourself in a new position or finding out how you deal with a new set of circumstances, if you remove the element of risk, somehow you've lost that newness, you've lessened the stakes to the point of comfort. And I don't know if there's a perversion in our minds, or people might claim it's being an adrenaline junkie, but it seems to me like there's some connection between consequence and meaning, or between risk and reward.
Oh, yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I absolutely feel, I understand what you're saying, but there's a different threshold for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Some people, the risk is like walking 5 blocks to go to the park, and they feel like, wow, that's really pushed it. But, and obviously our thresholds may be a bit higher, not nearly as high as some other people's, like Alex Honnold or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
But our threshold's much higher. And so we, for us, walking to the park or walking on a class 1 peak now, that's just a normal trailed peak and fairly boring, that for somebody else is the biggest accomplishment they've ever done. We kind of yawn a bit, right? And so there's different thresholds for everybody to get to that point. And my threshold and our thresholds are changing as our experience gets better.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
As we get more comfortable exploring the deeper recesses of a mountain range, for instance.
But we don't always feel the need to push the limit.
No.
Like for instance, 2 trips ago, we did Mount Abbott, which was it was a mixed climb with a lot of snow hazard.
Yeah, a lot of objective risk.
It ended up seeming class 4 the whole way, even though it's rated class 3.
Yeah.
And I'll describe the classes for anyone that doesn't understand it soon.
Yeah.
And then on the heels of that, we did a much less technical climb of Mount Baxter, 4 days ago or something?
Yep.
It didn't feel
risky.
Boring. No, but it didn't. What I'm saying is, we don't need to constantly be pushing the limit to feel fulfilled.
No.
But at the same time, without the element of risk or danger, you lose the element of the unknown. Everything's in your control.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so I guess the question becomes, is there something like nefarious or damaging to needing risk to find meaning?
Well, and that's a psychological,
Have you struggled? All right, here's a good question.
Yeah.
Have you gotten in a position where you were enjoying the pursuit of risk and it turned on you and you suddenly felt like, I don't want to be here. I'm not having fun. I regret all of this.
Yeah.
I've had that before.
Yeah. Well, probably my scariest moment, if you will, it would be, and this was on a solo trip I was doing out of Mason Lake, just in the Whitney Portal area. I was doing Mount, my goodness, which one is it? It's Mount Mallory. So it's not it's not a technical, I think it's class 2 peak. But the problem was I was doing it in a day and I was dehydrated as I often am.
Yeah.
I never
carry enough water.
I need to manage that better. And I ended up with I did the peak, started having headache at the summit. And by the time I got down to the Mason Lake, which is maybe 1,000 feet lower in elevation, it's a lake where then you have to climb up out of that lake to get to the main trail. So I knew I'd have another than say 300 feet to go up before I got to go really start making my way down in elevation. my headache got so bad, I had to crawl into in between two rocks into the shady spot I could find because I felt like my head was going to explode. And I thought, I'm going to have an aneurysm right here. They're going to find me between these two rocks. This is it. I'm done. And I forced myself to get up. I was only able to make it up maybe 50 feet of elevation to get up and over the rise.
What elevation were you at?
Oh, this is so I think it's probably at the 12,000 foot range.
You're up there.
Yeah, I'm up there. Yeah. Maybe it's 11.5 or something like that. But, and the headache, I mean, it was debilitating. I couldn't move. I was nauseous. I was, I was, my vision was off, and I'd had a few migraines over my life, but nothing like this. Yeah. I thought, this is it. This is going
to be a medical emergency.
This is the one where they find me.
Oh my God.
And of course, this is all before I couldn't hit SOS on any,
would you have if you had the?
Good question.
Were you at that point, or would
Good question. Would I have hit it? Because now that I have it, would I have used it?
Right.
Yeah.
Or would you try?
Amount of pride, I probably would have just tried to force it until I was so debilitated I couldn't hit the button anymore. Who knows? They would have said, "He had his thing. Why didn't he use it?" They found his body right next to his fully charged Garmin, and he didn't push the SOS button. I could see that. I could see that being the story actually. Too much pride. But that was one where I thought, this is it. I pushed it too hard. And so since that time, I've tried to be much better about my hydration and also be more sensitive to headaches and making sure.
Well, how did you get out of the predicament?
I didn't.
You just struggled through and made it out.
I mean, if I could have crawled, I would have. I stood up. I was able to stand upright and do it. Thank God I only had a day pack. But I would have left a full backpack there. I would not have tried to carry it. I would have said I need to just get myself better before I can actually. And I made it out fine. But I mean, I say fine. I felt like shit.
Yeah.
But it worked out really well in the long run.
Yeah.
made my way home. And it also taught me I've got to really, control the variables I can try to control here. I think I'd arrived at the trailhead at 2 a.m. and I'd left and I didn't even sleep. I just left right away. It was like a 2:30 leave, alpine start,
right.
And
so you woke up at sea level.
I didn't even sleep. I literally
within 24 hours you were at sea level.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And then you're up.
Yeah. It's just
12.
I need, and I'd still push that sometimes, but I needed, now I know what I've got to minimize that risk. So that was the only time I've ever said that I've got to the point where I was like, wow, risk has really tried to bite me in the butt.
Wow. Well, you've had a charmed,
so far
history so far, given the places you put yourself.
Yeah.
I'm aware of that.
Yeah. So far.
I guess the theoretical question is, would your outlook be different if you'd had
an accident,
a worse experience, or no? Is your outlook shaped by your kind of blessed situation that you haven't been with someone who's had a serious accident yet, you haven't had a serious accident yet, or is it simply your outlook and you're aware of the consequence, and coming into contact with that consequence wouldn't necessarily change you philosophically?
No, I think if I had a bad accident, it would change.
Would.
And the reality is I do, as I do so much climbing with my son, and every time I'm climbing with him and I see him doing risky stuff, same stuff I just did, or he's doing in front of me, I think, God, let's get one accident with him. And I think it would change my outlook, obviously, way more than having an own personal tragedy or
No, but that's trauma. A great point. Yeah. So that's a moment where there's like a window opening on objectivity for you, and you realize, oh, my relationship with risk is very subjective and specific to my circumstance.
Absolutely.
Because as soon as your son walks the same traverse, you see it from a different angle.
Oh, I can't. There's a particular traverse on Dragon Peak. Yes.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. So it's, Dragon Peak is not a technical traverse, even though it looks like it is in videos and photos, because it's just a small ledge near the summit. It's at 13,000 feet. I don't know actually how high that mountain is. Maybe it's just shy of 13,000, but it's only 15 feet from the summit. And it's a traverse that's maybe 20 feet long. And it's truly one of the traverses. If you were to slip and fall, there's no coming back. Okay. So there's some people
thousands of feet sheer cliff.
I don't know about thousands of feet, but it's certainly hundreds. Okay. Hundreds is enough. It doesn't, at that point,
it looked like thousands.
Yeah. At that point, it doesn't matter. Okay. But so I went ahead and did the traverse first. And
can you describe what the traverse entails?
The traverse is maybe at 3 inches wide. It's narrower than your boot actually.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to try to walk across it, so you're edging your boots across there and stepping over yourself, one boot at a time to be able to get to the destination. But it's a slight slab. And so you're able to use some handholds to help you get across. So it's not totally vertical. It's close to vertical, but not totally vertical. Just enough leaning in that you don't have to feel like you're just going to tip over the edge.
But as I recall, they're not proper handholds.
Oh no, not proper hand. You've got to do some searching. Yeah. I mean, it's not like you're taking a rope over. And honestly, I'd read a lot about it before I did it, and I knew that it was totally within my wheelhouse to do to handle. So we got up there, and I had him film me going across, no problem. Right? I'm like, all right, Donovan, hang out. I'm going to climb up a few feet, and I want to film you looking down, so that for the perspective of looking down across the traverse. And once he started going across, it was as scared as I've ever been in the mountains watching him do it from above. All I could do was look into I think I was using a cell phone to record him or GoPro. I can't remember. All I could do was look at the screen because I couldn't look at him.
Wow.
I was like, this is a moment I can't actually even watch my son do this.
Wow.
Because it just felt like, one, I was being an irresponsible father, and two, what if there is a tragedy here? This changes the world, And so, but of course, he's such a strong climber. For him, he was basically just doing it one-handed as he walked across.
I've actually seen that footage. He looked more casual than you did.
Super casual.
Crossing it.
Super casual, but I was so scared.
But that's very interesting how our outlook can shift in a minute. And we realize that what we thought was purely objective and rational might be misguided, might be specific to our moment in life. And much later we'd look back on it and say, what was I thinking? What was I doing? Yeah. That's a very interesting thing.
Yeah.
And, for a lot of people in my family, people close to me, the idea of simply going into the backcountry solo, forget about peak bagging or climbing, forget about the class system, just going alone.
Right.
Whenever I run into neighbors and I'm coming back from a trip and I've got, the pack and I look the part.
Yeah. Walking down the sidewalk to your place.
Walking down the sidewalk with an ice axe and helmet hanging off. But they'll ask what I did and they'll always say, but you went with someone.
Yeah.
And sometimes I say, no.
Yeah.
And there's this pallor.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this is the last time they'll see me and I'm heading to the gallows. And they say, that's really dangerous.
Yeah.
And what can I say? It is, but there's also, there's a power to it. There's an empowerment to it. And again, it's seeking that unknown when you're, and this is something specific to traveling solo.
Right.
And I know before I met you, I did 60 or 70% of my outings solo.
Right.
And I was really proud of the fact that I could do it because it took me years to develop the balls to do it. I was terrified. I have memories of being in a tent on the slopes north of Ediza Lake. It's on the way to like Ritter and Banner.
Yep.
And it was a cold snap and it was really windy. This was my first night in a non-organized campsite alone.
Okay.
And I was so scared that I brought a knife. And I fell asleep holding the knife. Against what? I don't know. The nightmare of loneliness. But I fell asleep holding the knife because I was just terrified of, we talk about exposure in terms of fall, but I just felt this massive emotional vulnerability that I'm just out there alone. Whatever happens, I have to rely on myself. And also the idea that in modern life, we're so distracted all the time. We're not alone with our thoughts and our inner selves. And if you are in a bad place personally, that's going to come to the fore when you're alone in the wilderness, right?
Yeah.
So I guess everyone has their own level of risk they pursue. I like to think that it's always beneficial. But the truth is, like you, I haven't been injured doing this yet. I've been injured before and it changed me profoundly.
Right.
I haven't been injured doing this.
Right.
And so that, that does raise the question.
I know.
Do we know what we're putting at stake or not? Do we know what we're anteing with, or are we just having fun playing?
Right. I think I'm having fun playing, yes, but like you've got one child, I've got 4.
Yeah,
I think about that all the time, and but then again, I still keep doing it. But I do make sure that if I'm going to do something that I feel like is going to be very technical, that I have people with me
so they can tell the story.
So they can push the SOS button when I refuse to do it.
That's it. Isn't that interesting though, that we can't put our children at risk, but we're willing to put ourselves at risk and ignore the fact that damage to us is damage to them.
Yeah.
It's so easy to overlook that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Just to clarify for people that might not know, can you describe, I've heard the 4 class systems described in 2 different ways. Obviously, class 5 and above is anything that's technical climbing, requiring without question protection or harnesses, ropes, etc.
Unless you happen to be an Alex Honnold or somebody else.
For the mere mortal,
For
class
mere mortal,
5 and up is traditional
for people
climbing.
who want to stay.
Yeah.
Mortal. Yeah.
1 through 4 I've heard described differently. One in terms of potential consequence, and the other I've heard described in terms of what's required of the climber. Meaning, like I've heard before, class 1, you fall, you might get hurt, probably not. Class 2, you fall, you will get hurt, you might get injured. And then I've heard it described differently. Class 2 is walking with feet. Class 1 is walking with feet. Class 2 is using hands, etc. How did you hear it described?
I mean, class 1 I've always felt like is like it'd be like walking on a trail. You know, you can if you fall, you can sprain an ankle, you could scrape your knee. No different than walking to the park from your place. Okay, that'd be a class 1. Now, if you had to go up and over a hill, use your hands to kind of make your way through a couple boulders to get up over there, it'd be a class 2. You can fall there. You can maybe you could potentially break something, but you're not going to have anything, nothing of consequence in long term. Class 3 is when it starts becoming more consequential. So class 3, what I've heard is it's described as, I always like this description. It's like climbing a staircase. It can be as simple as climbing a staircase, but one side of the staircase has thousands of feet of exposure.
I've heard that.
Okay. And I like that description. So if you're comfortable on a staircase, anybody can climb class 3. You just have to be comfortable with that exposure.
The mental fortitude involved.
It really comes down to like, oftentimes that transition between class 2 and class 3 is really a mental game for people.
Yeah.
Much more than a technical game.
Yeah.
Class 4 is when it becomes more technical. You have to really rely on your hands, really rely on your feet, really rely on balance, because you're making your way over some features that are more technical minded and can be more challenging from a climbing standpoint. And if you fall, you can actually absolutely die in those situations. That said, the vast majority of people are comfortable enough doing those without having to put ropes on. But if you're not comfortable, you can absolutely, over class 4 terrain, use ropes to do it. You may not use it. You may not be putting protection in, maybe using natural features as we've done before for protection, horns of rocks, putting a rope over, helping yourself, just essentially using the natural features of the rock to prevent any massive fall that would lead to death.
Right.
Okay. And that's class 4. Then class 5, like you said, is technical climbing, placing protection, absolutely necessary unless you have some sort of death wish.
Yeah. It's funny.
Yes.
Kim Stanley Robinson.
Yeah.
This guy whose book we've referenced a couple times.
Love this book.
This was kind of formative for the younger generation when I learned, even though I'm not that young, I learned late, kind of the way R.J. Secor's book was formative for the early one. Yeah. But he is not a fan of exposure or climbing whatsoever. And he describes the difference between class 2 and 3 as trauma. Yeah. He says class 1 and 2, you can have fun. Class 3 and 4 are undeniably traumatic. That's his interpretation.
Yeah, but I would say class 3 is a very, very ambiguous zone. And I think it really comes down to mental game in class 3.
Yeah.
Because really, I think you can put anybody who has some sort of ability, any athletic ability at all, on a class 3 climb from the floor to the ceiling here, and they can do it no problem. That same climb, if you put 1,000 feet
of exposure,
it's the same climb,
right?
But boy, it becomes a mental game.
It does, and you have to have a willingness to play with your life.
Absolutely,
even if the odds are overwhelmingly in your favor.
Absolutely,
you may be playing with your life.
But I love class 3. I love what it does to me.
What does it do to you?
Well, it's sphincter tightening. That's what my son and I will say. It tightens that sphincter, and it just when you tightening that sphincter, it just clarifies things for you.
Jason, it's the sphincter of perception. Yeah. It tightens, and you have myopic laser focus. But that's it, right? You have no ability to think of anything but the move in front of you.
No, I love that.
What I found on Mount Abbott, which was the first emblem peak, the SPS is divided into 3 sections: regular peaks, mountaineering peaks, and I believe of the 241, there are just 12 that are emblem peaks.
I think it's 12.
I believe it's 12, maybe as many as 14.
Maybe,
So Mount Abbott was my first.
Right.
And I was very curious how fearful I would be when I was confronted with, it ended up being a lot of class 4 bits, even though it's rated class 3.
Yeah. And with the conditions that were there, definitely more class 4.
Exactly. Because of the snow, the ability for the snowbanks to shear off.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what was fascinating, I found that there simply wasn't room for fear.
No.
There wasn't the option of fear. Fear took up too much real estate.
Right.
In the moment, you need all of your focus to be on maybe risk mitigation, but mostly just properly executing whatever move is required, whatever it is, whether it's hammering your crampons in properly to down climb, or whether it's a real climbing move on rock, which we had. There's simply, if you're feeling fear, you're incapacitated and you're not going to be able to move forward. There's not room for it to coexist.
Right. I mean, you're either paralyzed by it or you're just like, you push through it and you need to focus on
you just
what
don't
the
have
next
it.
Yeah.
And that was fascinating. It felt like being bathed clean of emotion altogether.
Yeah.
And that's a nice feeling.
Yeah. And I love what it does to your focus. I love the fact that, walking on a class 1 path, you can be thinking about the lunch you're going to have next Wednesday at work. Honestly, I mean, you can think about negative things happening in your life. When you're in class 3, class 4, your focus is this narrow window in front of you. And I love that focus. Then you get to a point where you can rest and then you can broaden your perspective again. I love that. You focus, sit, relax, and you take in the glorious view. And then you focus, take in that glorious view. I love that interplay.
Yes.
As you climb these peaks.
Yeah. I
mean, I'll get these moments when I'm climbing where I've had this moment happen twice now on 2 particular climbs. One was on Abbott and one was on this, it was just a rock climb I did where I was so hyper-focused on putting my pieces in, making sure, every move I made was right because I didn't want to fall my pieces. In trad climbing, you just don't want to fall. And I moved my hand up and out of my watch, I got this glorious view of the mountains reflecting. And then it reminded me the bigger picture I was in for this momentary.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that moment. I brought my hand across. I'm like, oh God, that's beautiful. Well, focus again. It's
a glimpse of the wider world.
Yeah. It was this moment. Yeah. And then you get to the top though, and you can really then spend that time focusing on that. And I love that interplay, like focus, and then just relax and take it in. As opposed to like the class 1 walks, which are great too. We love getting the tops of those, but something I love about that class 3, class 4 lane of mountaineering. I love it.
It felt to me that rapid expansion of awareness again, when you can release.
There you go. Rapid expansion of awareness is really good.
It also felt like a return to the self.
Right.
For a while, I was nothing but the action.
Yeah.
There's no room for your emotional landscape,
nothing.
Your psyche. You leave it at the foot of the mountain,
and
you just do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And I remember when we got down from Abbott, because the summit was stunning.
Yeah.
But that's not where you celebrate your triumph. You celebrate at the bottom.
A climb like that, you celebrate at the bottom.
Right. It was treacherous.
Like one thing about being at the top of that mountain, I was like, we got a lot ahead of us. A lot ahead of us to get down this thing. I knew about all the rappels you're gonna have to do. I was thinking about every little place you're gonna have to rappel. So it was hard to But
when we got to the bottom, I remember feeling like, I'm me again. I'm still here.
Yeah.
And that was such a wonderful feeling. To return to self, to have that broadened awareness and to appreciate it.
Yeah.
It was really nice.
Celebrate. It was great. And that was one of those cases where that would have been a really, I wouldn't say tragic, but just really unfortunate peak to do solo because it was such a team effort.
Yeah.
And it was so great to celebrate as a team afterwards.
Yes.
Right. I mean, there's certain peaks you do solo that, it's okay to celebrate solo afterwards. You're, I don't know, just having that sort of personal celebration is enough. Boy, that one I really enjoyed having all of us together, that team effort and that team celebration afterward. I felt so good.
I think there was a 40-minute walk. Maybe it was a full hour from the base of the mountain back to camp. It was a constant victory lap.
We were
strutting.
We were strutting. I mean, seriously.
It was amazing.
We were strutting. Yeah. We were strutting.
Interestingly, everything we're describing is not that far from near-death experiences in general, is it?
I suppose not.
That feeling of gratifying return.
I suppose not. I mean, I don't like to think the stuff we're doing is near-death experience, though.
No, I don't like to think of it.
I certainly don't like to say that, articulate that to my family.
No, but there is uncanny overlap.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Let me ask you a question about traveling solo, because you told me at one point that you did do a lot of solo stuff and then you stopped. Why was that?
Well, 2 reasons why I stopped doing the solo stuff. One was I had that experience with my headache, and that really scared me. You know, that said, I went back and did something 2 weeks later solo. It's fine.
So it stopped you for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't stop me forever. But I used to like solo backpacking. Yeah, I loved it. And same thing with you. Initially, when I did, in fact, I remember the very first time my first night solo backpacking was on the slopes of Mount St. Helens.
Okay.
Before I climbed Mount St. Helens, and it was only like a mile from the car. and I was going to camp there, and then I was going to put my stuff in the car and then climb the next day. And I had this crazy experience where I didn't know what to do. It was really light out still. I'm like, all right, I'll get in my tent, I guess. I need to go to bed because I need to climb in the morning. I get in the tent. All of a sudden, I start hearing like the ground doing like just crazy amounts of like pounding on the ground. And so I'm freaking out, and I open my tent fly, and here comes this herd of elk. Like I've never seen, like just
how many?
More than I could like see through my, it was just like you'd imagine. You open it up, and all of a sudden you'd see elk just running by the tent.
Wow, and
it was crazy, like and how noisy it was. And after that, I had a hard time sleeping, because I just thought they're going to come back. I'm going to be in their way, and they're going to run over my tent, But that was my very first night, and just that freaked me out.
That's quite a welcome.
Yeah, it was a welcome to solo backpacking. But I started doing stuff that I'd take my dog with me, and because I always felt more comfortable and take my dog. So I did some backpacking trips with my dog, and that was nice. So.
But you told me about another experience you had that stopped you from going solo.
Well, that didn't have anything to do with backpacking.
Okay.
That was on a trip to Morocco. I think that's where you're referring to. Yeah. So I was flying home from Morocco, and I was over Moroccan airspace, soon after liftoff, and I had a grand mal seizure, and I'd never had a seizure before, and I don't remember anything about having the seizure except I remember I was with my wife, and we didn't have my second wife, so we didn't have kids yet, but I had two older kids, and I remember leaning over and asking her for or she was handing me the throw up bag,
mm-hmm.
and then all of a sudden everything went black, and she said she's a physician. She had a full grand mal seizure, and in the plane, and I'd been sick before we left. I had some dysentery. She'd had a little bit as well, but she was more recovered than me, and so I don't know. We don't know how much that came into play. Probably had a lot to do with it. The first thing I remember, even though I couldn't see yet, is I remember hearing the steward say, "Is there," screaming, "Is there a doctor on the plane?" And I heard my wife say, "I am a doctor," and then I remember hearing him saying, "Oh, thank God," And what they did was they were going to try to land me in Tangiers, and my wife said, "No, we're flying to Paris." That was where we were going to be catching our flight to the States. And she didn't want me in a Moroccan hospital. They pushed me in the back of the plane, gave me oxygen, and apparently I'd gone incontinent because that's what happens when you have a seizure. Didn't know that. And so they cleaned me up a little bit. And of course, I think everybody on the plane must have assumed I was on drugs or something, like why else would this, crazy looking guy, be having a seizure on the plane. And it was a scary moment for her more than me because actually I don't remember a lot of it. Mm-hmm. But and I came back, I did all the MRIs I was supposed to do, went to see the physicians. They couldn't find anything organic for the reason that I had the seizure. But from that moment, I knew that I was if I had something like that happen in the backcountry, I was not coming back. And so I thought, all right, I'm going to try to stop doing solo stuff as much as I can. As you're aware, I still do some because sometimes you just don't have the partners, but you got the time. And when you don't have partners and you got the time, and you got the list and you got the desire, you still go.
The list.
No, you still go, but maybe you just don't do ones with as many objective dangers. So you can try to, just in case that were to happen, you're not going to fall off the side of a cliff. You'll just be on a trail, But that was the main, since that moment, I've been much, and of course my family at that point was like, stop doing solo stuff.
Yeah.
You need to stop doing solo stuff.
Yeah.
And so I hear, and all my staff, you need to stop doing solo stuff. And so same thing every time I go on a trip, like, who are you going with? I'm going alone. They say, same thing, that pallor. They're like, this, what are you doing?
Although the evening I met you, you'd just come off the slopes of University Peak solo.
Right. Okay. Uh-huh.
And you told me the ice was very treacherous. I remember this.
Well, once again, the only reason that happened was I wasn't supposed to be on a solo trip. I was supposed to be on a 3-day group trip. The dates got moved over because of permits.
I remember.
So I had this day off. I had the time.
Yeah.
Didn't have a partner. So I'm still going to go.
It's an interesting story how we met.
Yeah.
I was supposed to be on a solo trip. We had a reverse situation. You were supposed to be on a group trip.
Right.
I was supposed to be on a solo trip. Your group changed the dates, so you ended up that day on your own.
Right.
And I had recently taken a first responder course, and I came across I got over a high pass. So I was down into fairly remote backcountry, and I ran into a couple guys, one of whom was clearly in very bad shape, and he claimed he felt like his lungs were filled with wet tissues.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Yep.
Yeah. And he said he could hear crackling.
Yeah.
And he was, laying down on the side of a mountain. It wasn't a good situation. For me, being flush with knowledge and a certified first responder, I took it on myself, and I remember it took something like 8.5 hours, and I got them out while I was in contact with Inyo Search and Rescue.
Right.
But I came out on the first night I was supposed to be going in.
Right.
And
you'd gone in and then literally come out. You hadn't even
right
set
out.
up your tent, just carried your full pack up and over this task.
Exactly right.
Wow, that's
and so
tough.
I remember I didn't know
easy.
where I was sleeping. I didn't know what I was doing. At the time, I didn't have a roof tent.
Right.
So I just had the Jeep that was filled with crap and I couldn't sleep in it. And I was eating lunch out of my trunk. Dinner, I'm sorry. I was eating dinner out of my trunk, and you were eating dinner out of yours. I still remember. I have such a vivid image of you in the hoodie. You had this little igloo that looks like it's for Little League football.
Yep.
And you were heating up ramen.
Yeah.
And we faced each other.
5-star.
Yeah, we were facing each other at a distance of 3.5 feet. And so we said, hey.
Yeah. Well,
and then
you're like, what'd you do today?
Yeah,
What'd you do today?
exactly.
Yeah.
And so we started talking. You're like, oh yeah, I almost died on university. And I was like, oh, I just met a guy who almost died. Hey, we should almost die together tomorrow. And that's what happened. We ended up going back in together. You did your own thing. You climbed Mount Rixford. I climbed Mount Bago, but we stayed in touch, and the drugs took hold.
Yes, they did.
From there on.
Yeah, yes, they did.
Yeah. So that was interesting.
Yeah, that was a funny way to meet. That's for sure. Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing strikes me as very extreme, and that's probably a statement on me more than the activity.
Right.
That I think I lived a very conservative lifestyle through my adolescence, and I think I was a fearful kid.
Okay.
I don't feel that way anymore,
Right.
but to some degree, we're always rebelling against our child selves, right?
Right. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. I don't know. For me, I feel like I'm just layering on top of where I was as a child, actually.
Yeah. Well, did you ever live a more conservative lifestyle, or were you always drawn to the extreme, drawn to exploration?
I was drawn to exploration from the beginning. Even like I said, like even as a kid, I was like, I need to get out of this boat and go climb and go hike and go,
Right.
I mean, I talked my dad into backpacking. My second backpacking trip was with my dad.
Right. Oh,
That was his first and last backpacking trip. You carried a knife. He brought a gun.
he brought a gun?
He brought a gun.
Like
Not allowed to bring a gun in the backcountry.
A handgun, I hope.
Handgun.
Okay.
He brought a handgun.
Just out of fear.
My dad's like favorite movie is Deliverance, and I think he just thought we're going into the backcountry, and who knows who we're going to find back there, and who's going to like try to kidnap us or cut out a kidney. I don't know what he was thinking, but he was just ready. He was ready for whatever came his way, and that was his first and last time in the backcountry.
Deliverance is not a good introduction to solo backpacking.
Exactly.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So I think I've been layering on top of what my sort of like desire to explore from the beginning. I didn't really have that like. I wasn't a fearful kid at all.
Yeah.
They were always trying to like rein me in.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I had a spiral fracture of the femur.
Right.
Which is a really damaging break when I was, I don't know how old I was, 6 maybe?
Oh, okay.
6 or 7.
Yeah.
And I was in traction. They had to pull the femur out of the abdomen. I had to relearn to walk. There's a lot of family videos of me strapped to a skateboard because I'd get around the house for the first couple months.
Wow.
I couldn't use the leg.
Wow.
So I'm sure that had something to do with not being drawn to sports.
Yeah, right.
Until I was maybe in my early 20s. And then it turned around.
Right.
But you've always struck me as a bit of a Clark Kent.
Right.
Well, Clark Kent is the Superman alter ego, right?
Right.
In that there's this schism that you're very much a family man professional. Right. But then you get out there and you live like a wild man.
Yeah.
And I mean, has it always been like that? I know you talked to me a little about having this division between what you were meant to do after college and what called you. Can you tell me that story?
Well, what I was meant to do after college.
What you felt you were meant to do and what you felt you had to do.
Right. That's a good question. I'll say this. I've always had this like two sort of like, I don't know, I won't call them conflicting things in my life, but like when I was in dental school or undergrad, even grad school, it was always like work your butt off as needed to get further ahead and educate yourself, so that I could go down my path. I became an orthodontist, but as soon as I could finish my duties there, it's time to either do one of two things: either party, which I don't do anymore, or get out there, get out in the wilderness and push the limits of exploring the wilderness. And during college, that was all about like road trips and learning to climb a little bit and starting my backpacking experiences. And then in grad school, it was more like, all right, let's do more climbing. All right, do more backpacking, do more peak bagging. And, but I'd work my butt off Monday through Friday to get there. And then I'd, working for the weekends, but my working for the weekends was not to go, to the bars or anything like that. It was to get out in the wilderness. It was like Friday night, jump in the car, drive as far as you can, sleep next to your car. Sometimes just sleep in the car in my Nissan 200 SX, and then just get out there and have fun. So I've always had this, that's always been my lifestyle. As far as I can remember, that's been my lifestyle. And it's still to this day. As you know, I'll work up until 6 o'clock and jump in the car and then go, okay, I'll meet at the trailhead.
You sleep less than most people I know.
Yeah. And my wife says, she says, I've got some sort of adult, hypomanic is what she says I am, where it's like, I can't sit down. I can't relax. And even in the backcountry, you may experience.
I've noticed it.
Okay.
Trust me, we haven't talked about it yet. Yes. I've noticed it.
I mean, I try really hard when I'm in the backcountry just to like settle in and just relax. But I'm always feeling like I've got to get the next step of this process. And so I need to slow down. That I feel the need to slow down and like experience stuff more. And but I'm always like pushing to.
Why do you think that is?
I don't. Yeah, it's a psychological impediment, or
no. You could claim that it's your nature, or you could claim that there's a productive purpose to it as a result of something.
I mean, like as my wife has said, the reason I'm so successful on all levels of everything I've done is because I am so hypomanic, and I do take everything I do seriously and try to commit to it all. Right. The problem is, like she says, I stretch myself too thin. I'm like president of this Orthodox society, president of a mountaineering society. And then at the same time, trying to raise 4 kids and trying to run 2 practices. And, but it's all gone well to this point.
Yeah. But it's the same pursuit of the extreme in all arenas, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I definitely have. Absolutely. I don't sort of like, when you say extreme, I'd say it's pursuit perfection when it comes to like orthodontics, but I feel like it's the same way when it comes to the mountaineering and the backpacking.
But there's a speed to it, an intensity, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely, yeah. I mean, if you can sort of like, I'm just going to be mediocre at everything, which is fine too. It's a great lane to be in, but I feel like I wouldn't be satisfied in that lane. So I try to push it in all the lanes, and of course, my wife's she's cool like hanging out in the mediocre lane and. For most of the time, and then pushing into perfection when it comes to his family and profession sometimes. But I'm always got to be in that lane, and it can drive people crazy a little bit.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah. It's interesting that you say mediocre, and I can relate to this personally. I wouldn't claim that other people who are more able to relax, who are maybe more creatures of comfort, are settling for mediocrity.
Not mediocrity.
I think they're pursuing a totally different brand of fulfillment and perfection, so to speak.
I didn't mean to denigrate anybody who's in that. Yeah.
But I know what you mean because, and I've always blamed this on childhood psychology, which I mentioned before, that we're still trying to counterbalance our past selves, even though we no longer really claim them.
Yeah.
But I feel the same way, that everything that I try to do, I love the idea of doing it to the absolute highest level, even if it's not possible. Like I'm never going to be the highest level of mountaineer. I simply don't have the athletic background. Right from there, you're off that list.
Yeah, and I'm also, at my age, it's impossible for me to get any better. So like I've reached my peak. But
there's
on the
still this dream, right?
Yeah, of course.
There's this need to pursue some unobtainable perfection. And I don't know if that speaks to a love of life and an eagerness for challenge, or if it speaks to a certain deep set insecurity and inability to sit back and simply be who you are with what you've accomplished and not be chasing the next goal. And
I think it's what's keeping me alive. I can't imagine a time when I'm like, all right, I'm done with lists. I'm just going to sit back in my easy chair and just look at my list and feel like, life
and
fulfilled.
Gloat.
It's hard for me to realize.
Smoke a cigar in your smoking robe.
I don't think it's going to happen for me. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think I'm going to go and keep going until the day when my body says it's done. And at that point, I'll go into some deep depression, but I'll have a wealth of stories to read, look back on, videos to watch. And that's why I do all this stuff. Cause I really, yeah.
Yeah. I forget who wrote it. I wish I remember, but there's a great line about mountaineers secretly wanting to be finished by the mountain, not age.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there's no worse there's no worse sentence than to live in a body that can no longer get up.
Yeah,
there.
but now when you see all these great mountaineers getting old and passing away, like the ones who've made it all the way into their 80s and 90s, and you read their stories and you see what they've done with their lives later on in lives, I think they probably changed that a little bit. I mean, those guys like they've absolutely enjoyed their their later years and the accolades and yeah, it's
so easy. It's so easy to talk big from safety. I think life is so precious, and that in the end, we all talk about the circumstances under which we would no longer want to be alive.
Yeah.
It's bullshit top to bottom.
Yeah.
I think every day is meaningful and precious, and it would take such a high degree of debilitation to actually make life no longer worth living for most people.
Yeah.
I really think so. And I think that
you can't say like, I hate when they say, oh, he died doing what he loved. Great. Well, God, he died at age 33 though?
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's like, it's like, there's nothing great about that at all.
No.
And for me at age 55, that wouldn't be great at all. So I'm definitely trying to preserve, this life as much as I can.
It's that funny balance.
Yeah.
We're acting in a way athletically and risk-taking where we want to remain young forever.
Right.
But the literal translation of remaining young forever is dying young, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we don't want that.
Nope. Don't want
Somewhere
that.
in between lies the truth.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. And also just the question of balance, whether you can have these extreme pursuits, or in your case, what you're describing is just an extreme nature across the board, but then still find a way to strike a balance so that these things are sustainable and don't just burn themselves out.
Yeah.
And the same for us. I find that I'm constantly pushing myself physically to the absolute edge of what I can do, and occasionally breaking down and having to take time off, whether I'm injured or just horrendously fatigued.
Yeah.
And then I'll just go seeking that edge again over and over and over. And I think to some degree we go out there to find our limit, and it's great to have one. I almost pity the ultra runners who don't know where their edge is anymore.
Right.
They can go out for 12 hours and come home and feel fresh.
Right.
That would be such a disappointing emptiness for me.
Right.
To not reach a point where I've come back feeling gloriously fatigued, wonderfully broken, and I can finally just sit.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's finally a place where we can stop moving.
Right. Yeah. It's
that exhausting.
Until we're so orthopedically broken down and mentally worked so that literally we just want to sit in a chair and,
is that transcendence, senility?
I don't know. Maybe that's
double hip replacement, senility, and I finally found my zen.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah.
Then we can sit and watch Netflix for in our golden years. Yeah,
finally.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, this was great.
Yeah,
we got to do this again.
Yes,
hopefully it's the beginning of great things. We're supposed to actually go out in 2 days?
I'm hoping in fact we are going out in 2 days. It's not happening. It's happening.
All right, let's give a little preview. I'll put a link to the video in the show notes, but tell me what we're doing.
Right. So
I say with trepidation.
Yes. So I mean there's a particular peak in the Southern Sierra called Kern Peak that happens to be very, very far from any trailhead. It is not a technical peak. Class 1.
No, we're doing Homer's Nose.
No, in 2 days we're not. We're doing Kern Peak. Oh yeah, it's Kern Peak in 2 days.
I was unaware.
Oh yeah.
Okay, go on.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So
I thought we were doing Homer's Nose.
Homer's Nose we can do 2 weeks after that, but if we want to,
all right,
we've got discussions.
Kern Peak.
So Kern Peak is in the middle of nowhere. Literally, which is hard to do in the Sierras. There's a lot of nowhere, but sometimes, there's so many peaks close by. It's hard to be in the middle of nowhere from a peak standpoint. It's like 20 plus miles from any trailhead. And so we're going to be hiking, I think 27 miles that day in one day.
And a day hike.
Most people do it as a backpack trip, but it's 27 miles of trailed hiking. I think it's 20 miles of trailed hiking, 7 miles of untrailed hiking. So this is not going to be a technical peak by any means. Right. It's going to be a cruiser, if you will. All right. So plenty of time to talk, plenty of time to discuss, plenty of time to do some planning for other bigger and greater things. But it's been a peak that I've kind of kept pushing off because I don't really want to do a 27-mile day.
That's a lot of miles.
But, I don't know about how much time you have to recover, but the next week I'm going to go in the Philippines. I'll be sitting on a lounge chair, which is not my favorite thing to do unless I need to recover from a hike. So I'm looking forward to being orthopedically challenged here. And then I'll look forward to the
that's
recovery.
good. That'll put me in my seat at the desk for some serious writing.
There you go.
For at least a week.
There you go.
That sounds painful.
Yeah.
I know we did another hike. It was 23 or 24 miles. That of them, I'd say 22 were in downpour. Remember this?
Oh, yes, that was awesome.
So the 23 felt very much like 35. Because it was raining and muddy the whole time.
Yeah.
And it was pure suffer. You know, we have this term in the sport, sufferfest.
Yeah.
And it's meant as a positive. It's meant as something you look forward to.
Oh, I still think glory. I still smile. So when I think about that day,
that's a whole different discussion, isn't it? The whole sadomasochistic side.
Yeah. Why do we love it so much?
We do. We do. I don't know if it's the ability to endure that proves ourselves, or if it's actually just the thrill of the enduring.
No,
in
there's
the
something
moment.
psychological. Because I guarantee you, somebody else that was on that hike with us, that would be the worst day of their year.
Yeah.
For me, it was like top 5.
It was a good day.
It was a great day. I
was a
loved
good day.
that stuff.
Yeah.
I loved it.
My foot hurt for 2 or 3 days afterward. I remember.
Yeah, it was great.
That was good. All right, Jason, thanks for coming by.
Of course.
This is great.
Yeah, it's great seeing you. It's awesome.
That's it. Episode 1. We're underway. Thank you guys for joining me at the outset of this grand journey, I hope. If you enjoyed the show, you can always support us by subscribing on Patreon, where you can get a whole host of extras and expanded show notes. Don't forget to like, subscribe, rate, review, all the things that the internet demands of us. Should we keep the lights on here? There's lots more to come. Please stick around. See you soon. Bye.